And yeah, because you had testing in the beginning of the month, and we met 2 weeks.
2 weeks, right,
Yeah.
right.
So we last met.
Was the 8th, I think, the 8th and the 15th.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had you do a bunch of stuff, right?
Right.
Had you do mostly the waste and the rat. Those are kind of the primary things that we were interested in based off of what your questions were.
And stuff like that.
And so, just to give you an idea, and step back, that sheet you gave me with all the testing from
test
your
scores,
childhood,
yes.
Yeah, that came in quite handy because it gives us
a comparison.
A comparison, and it gives us, I would say, some history to kind of look at this. Because if you think of IQ, it's kind of like this construct that we use, right?
Right.
It's and what we know about it, it's relatively stable across the lifespan. It doesn't change a whole lot.
Right.
And so looking at your test scores, it didn't change a whole lot, right? But if you just look at that in isolation, the IQ score, it doesn't tell you much. Right?
You mean as far as experiential knowledge and environmental and everything
all
else?
of that, plus if you just look at IQ only, it doesn't tell you, okay, verbal ability, perceptual ability, well, what we call working memory ability, processing speed. Those are actually where the information is at to help us give you some helpful feedback.
Right.
And so...
So the methods today are actually different than the way back in the 60s and the way they did testing?
Yeah.
Because weren't test scores based just generally on scoring back then in the 50s, 60s when they did Stanford and WISC and all
Yeah,
those?
well, I would say between now and then, we've gotten more precision with it. We're a little bit more refined. We can estimate these abilities better, and we can break the scores down better and with meaning.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Back in the 60s, we the scores we had were just kind of like an estimate of your overall ability, and even overall verbal ability, for example.
Right. Where today, we're looking at several factors.
Yes, it's more meaningful to look at several factors. I guess I didn't print off a second copy. I'll load it up on the computer, and you can have this.
All right.
This is your copy.
Okay, great.
So there's the table there, and I want to walk it through.
Yeah, do that.
So the most important thing to remember, what I said just a little bit ago, is generally IQ still doesn't really change. Like the idea of IQ doesn't change across the lifespan because that's kind of like an innate ability. But that being said, there can be improvements in sub areas, right? So if you look at your scores, a table, so verbal ability. Ability to process verbal information, you score an 89. So 100 is average. Okay. 89. So basically, you're in the average range for verbal ability.
Okay. And
that's pretty consistent from what I've met with you, what other people have met with you. You seem to be pretty strong in verbal ability.
Verbal ability, right.
Right. And that's good to know. And we have different subtests for that. And I gave you 4 subtests. Some of them... Most of them you did pretty well on. One of them you had a hard time with.
Which one was that?
The information where I asked you just basically, it's like trivia. Like who is
it was a historical question, I think.
Yeah, it's basically like history, right? So tell me what the equator is, or something like that. You know, things like that. So that's where you had some difficulty. But the other ones, I mean, you're average all across the board. Okay. You're right where you need to be. It's where you get to what we found that was kind of a marked disparity is the perceptual reasoning. So
perceptual reasoning?
Okay. Perceptual. So this is like your visual motor tasks, visual processing tasks. So block design, being able to look at a picture, manipulate the blocks to form the picture.
Would that relate to driving? That's why I never drove.
That does relate to driving.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I've never learned how to drive.
Yeah, because that there's a big visual spatial, like you have to like see something, process it quickly, and judge distance, timing, all of that with driving, right?
Okay. Is sports or physical education related to that? I was never really good actually in physical education.
Well, let's just jump right into what we think is going on.
Okay.
We don't think you would fit really what they call intellectual disability. We would think what we call nonverbal learning disorder.
Okay, in other words, there are some things that are hard for me to articulate. I might know up here what it is, but to articulate it in writing or verbal.
It's you're well with verbal.
Okay.
So you're good verbally.
Okay.
It's
to articulate that meaning in paper. Is that what you're trying to say?
Sometimes transferring it over is hard. It's like the non-language component of your experiences. That's where you might have some difficulties. So you talked about gross motor ability,
Okay.
right? So physical education, like
Right.
people with nonverbal learning disorders have a hard time with that. It's like the gross motor stuff, but they're fine. Small.
Because if you were to ask you to, I'll do a simple example of like take the keys apart from the round ring. I can't even relate or do those kind of mechanical things at all.
Yeah. So, but your fine motor activity is relatively normal, right? So, like piano playing.
The velocity takes velocity and technique.
Yeah, that's different. Different parts of the brain.
Well,
that are
even
responsible
I
for
taught
that.
myself the computer. That's still a certain amount of.
Yeah, but it's like the more gross motor, like big muscle movements, physical activity, like sports.
Yeah, I can't catch
Yeah.
very well.
Though, like catching requires like your brain to tell your muscles to move in a particular place at a particular time, right?
Right.
But people with nonverbal learning disorders have a hard time with that.
That's why I was never allowed to use buffer machines or all those kind of because you're talking. This relates to motor.
Yep, it's like a visual spatial motor problem. It's not like you have a broad range of intellectual deficits. It's kind of specific to nonverbal information. So verbally, based off of our testing, you're right where you need to be.
Yeah, because I can articulate verbally
Yep.
and understand verbally, but when it comes to what you're saying, the motor,
Yeah, the motor stuff. So it makes it hard to do nonverbal tasks.
Yes.
And that's where certain types, like new situations where you have to follow a lot of detailed.
That's where I've always found myself in
tasks.
trouble trying to detail because it could mean this to me, or it could mean that, or I'm
Yeah.
wondering what do they mean by this or that.
Yeah, so that's one part of like semantics. So semantics is partly verbal, but it's also like figuring out like the underlying meaning to what you're being told and
Okay.
what you're processing. And people with nonverbal learning disorders have problems with that component of it.
Okay, yeah.
So that seems to fit with your experiences throughout work and
Right.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah. So like when you were diagnosed as a child with intellectual disability,
Right.
right? We feel like that's not accurate. We feel like verbally you're fine. For the most part, you're right where you need to be. But it's like when you break it down, like that IQ, you break it down, like, oh, looks like there's some perceptual reasoning problems.
Okay, yeah, because they used to always say verbally, they used to think I could just verbal something and not even understand what I'm talking about, but I don't believe that's the case. I verbally can comprehend and tell you what I am
Yeah.
articulating or communicating.
Yeah, you can communicate, pretty well, and that